Joining us now is Colonel James Sunderland, a Conservative MP and former Army officer. Welcome, James. First of all, your thoughts on the situation at the Rafah crossing. We're hearing that the first Brits have been allowed out, but many more are not getting through. There's a picture of chaos emerging at that crossing, a kind of a lottery where people who have the right to leave that country, leave Gaza because they're foreign nationals, are not getting through for a variety of reasons. Egypt, one has to say, doesn't seem that keen on letting too many people through that crossing, does it?
It's a funny old thing, isn't it, that we're talking about the injustice of war. We're talking about the appalling Israel-Gaza conflicts, and yet the Egyptians aren't necessarily keen to open the crossing. For me, it's quite simple. It requires the UN there in force. It requires an international effort to provide much faster and better humanitarian support. And it also requires a bit more of an effort led by the Foreign Office, in my view, to get Brits out. So it's about the Rafah crossing. It's about having the right presence there, and it's about making sure that the right decisions are taken on the ground.
I mean, Egypt has been quite remarkable, I would say, in all of this in terms of their opposition to helping anything whatsoever. The Wall Street Journal today reporting that the Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Mabouli said, when asked about whether Egypt would take Palestinian refugees, said, "We are prepared to sacrifice millions of lives to ensure no one encroaches on our territory." Jordan also saying, there's no way we're going to accept Palestinian refugees. Why on earth do you think are the neighbouring countries of Palestine not wanting to show solidarity?
Alex, is a very fair question without a simple answer. I mean, I suspect that the Egyptian government has a policy of not allowing the conflict to spill over onto Egyptian territory. I suspect that the Egyptian government doesn't want lots of people coming south because of the humanitarian cost. It may be a real estate issue, and maybe the fact that they simply don't want Hamas perhaps coming south either. So it's a matter for the Egyptian government, but in my view, it's about putting pressure to bear on the Egyptian government and all other partners in the Middle East to make sure we got an effective humanitarian solution to what's clearly an appalling conflict.
Yeah, let's not forget, James, that Jordan too is saying we don't want to take anybody from Gaza. So you're right. It's a question of talking to all these neighbouring Arab nations to see what they might do here. So far, they don't seem to be too cooperative. Let's move on to the hostages. Today, The Sun, a very powerful front page, has got the pictures of 32 little kids. There they are. They're all being held hostage in those dingy dungeons beneath Gaza. There are obviously old people there as well. There's more than 200 altogether. And I guess what we're saying here to Hamas, hoping against hope, they can show some human decency, at least let the little kids and the elderly go. Is that too much to ask? Can't they just go? These children should not be involved in this, should they?
Kevin, I agree. I'm a military man. I've spent a long time in the army. I've seen this firsthand. I've studied it. And ultimately, when you pick up arms and you fight a conflict, there's an understanding that if you're an armed protagonist, it's fair game. Unfortunately and tragically, women, children and the elderly are not fair game. And at the moment, Hamas have taken these hostages. You can't negotiate with Hamas. You can't necessarily demand for a ceasefire when you've got hostages that are being kept somewhere in Gaza. We saw the appalling atrocities in southern Israel a few weeks ago now. And by the same token, we've seen a bombing of indiscriminate civilian targets in Gaza. So if the cat fits, wear it. I think what we've got to do is pile pressure on all of the stakeholders. We're talking Hamas, we're talking Iran, we're talking Palestinian authorities, we're talking our partners in the Middle East. We need to get hostages home, and we need to basically get a sense of decency back to what will still be a horrible conflict.
Can I just briefly bring you back to Britain here? These pictures of these little kids remind us of these posters that pro-Israel supporters have been putting up around London and Manchester. And we've seen pro-Palestinian supporters tearing them down. I don't approve of that, but you would expect pro-Palestinian supporters, or some of them, to do this. What's your thought on the fact, extraordinarily in my view, that the police have taken to tearing down these posters, these empathetic posters of children and old people who are being held hostage under Gaza now? The police surely should not be doing this, should they? This is partisan.
This is such a difficult thing to comment on, and ultimately, I don't think the police do have a role in taking down those posters. We've got to make sure that we keep these poor people very much in the forefront of our minds. We've got to bring the hostages home, women, children, and elderly people at the top of the list. And ultimately, policing is difficult. I work in the Home Office, and we've got to make sure that we allow peaceful protest across London. That's lawful, that's fine. But by the same token, we can't be ripping down pictures of hostages. We've got to make sure that we try and keep law and order on the streets of the UK. It's about pragmatic policing. It's also about lawful protest not spilling over into unlawful protest. And we're seeing the reports today about the march has been planned for this weekend. That's fine, but if it spills over into breaking the law, if it spills over into jihadist chants, if it spills over into assaulting police officers or wearing para-wings, paragliders, the stuff that we've seen so far, those people need to be arrested and put away. So let's just make sure, please, that we dial down the rhetoric, that we police objectively, and that this does not spill over any more than it has to.
I mean, I want to give credit where credit's due to The Sun, actually, for having that front page, in stark contrast to The Guardian today, who has lost a staffer, who's pretty appalled at that newspaper's reportage of the situation. Sticking with the conversation about the planned march on 11/11, and I agree with you, I think it's absolutely right that we live in a free society, but I do worry that the more we're seeing these marches taking place, the bigger they're getting, the more emboldened people seem to be. And there were scenes on Twitter earlier today circulating showing chants on the metro in Paris with people actually shouting Nazi support. Is there not a concern, actually, that the more that we sort of are lily-livered about this, that it is going to embolden those who really do want to harm, offend, insult, and that this, we're actually not being quite strong enough?
Again, Alex, a tough one. I sympathise with all views on this. We've had a dialogue internally this week about whether or not the government should ban the march. Does the government have the powers to do that? I think the Home Secretary probably does, but it's not easy. Mayor of London, what's his view on this? He seems to be quite complicit in all of these marches that are taking place. It's also about pragmatic operational policing. I mean, 1 million people on the streets of London, that's not an easy thing to manage. So we have to allow a certain leeway and authority for the police to do their job. And the police should know full well the difference between lawful protest and unlawful protest. And it's at that point that operational decisions need to be taken on the ground.
Here's something I find strange, James. So Joe Biden has sort of joined Keir Starmer today in playing silly little linguistic games, if you ask me. If you want to call for a ceasefire, that's your right. By all means, do it. And we all understand why people might be minded to do that. But, we all fear for innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip. Personally, I'm not in favour of a ceasefire. That's my view. But Keir Starmer says, no, I'm not calling for a ceasefire. Same for Biden. What we're calling for is a humanitarian pause. Well, what's the difference? I'm just thinking, James, that right now is not the time to be playing silly little political games. Starmer is caught between a rock and a hard place. He took the right view, in my view, initially when he said we're four square behind Israel's right to defend itself. There must not be a ceasefire. Now he's got all the people in his party, all the left wings, Sadiq Khan among them, saying we're calling for a ceasefire and Keir better do it too. So he tries to sort of wriggle out of it by playing these mealy-mouthed linguistic games. I'm not calling for a ceasefire, but I'm calling for a humanitarian pause. What is the difference? This isn't the time for this kind of silly politics, is it?
No, you're right. I mean, I do play with a straight bat as a politician, at least I try to. And to give credit for Keir Starmer. The position that he's taken of being more or less aligned with the British government is about right. And I think he's right to do that. But he does have these influences within his own party. There is lots of talk about his party being divided, and he's taking a big risk. I think we should give him some credit for that, because he is holding firm at the moment. But will he bend? Will he yield? Will he start calling for a ceasefire? That's a matter for him. But the important thing for me is that we have got to make sure that we hold Israel to account. We have got to make sure that we urge restraint. We have got to make sure this does not spill over. We have got to dial down the rhetoric. And to a certain extent, I think that this is a real test for Keir Starmer. And one hopes that that he holds firm. Whether he's doing it because he believes it, whether he's doing it because he wants to be elected as Prime Minister next year, I don't know. I mean, your readers will have a view. But my point at the moment is that he's playing it about right, but he's going to be under real pressure to yield, I think.
Are you concerned, actually, that the sort of sensitivities around this, given that the Labour Party are the government in waiting, if anybody's looking at what Britain's geopolitical viewpoint is, they're not going to know that we're not actually very clear on this, and some of the sensitivities are now getting out of control. I mean, we've learnt today that Marks and Spencer has come under fire because apparently it shows in their new Christmas advert Christmas hats being thrown onto a fire, and they happen to be what I would consider Christmas colours. Green, red and silver, and people are saying, oh, well, it looks like you're burning something Palestinian related. It was filmed in August. I mean, is this now out of control, and that the rest of the world are watching thinking, what on earth is going on in Britain? Yeah,
they've apologised for this, James, and this picture you're looking at now of the Christmas hats in the fire, that's been exorcised from the advert. It's no longer in it. I mean, this is getting a bit ridiculous, isn't it?
No, I agree. I mean, you know, to be fair to Marks and Spencer's, it was filmed a number of months ago. Clearly, it's a complete accident that those colours were used. But to be fair, equally, Marks and Spencer should have seen it and they should have pulled it and dealt with it a lot earlier than they had. Just going back, if I can, to the issue with Labour, of course, and the nonsense. Keir Starmer has prided himself in recent months, at the conference in particular, of eradicating anti-Semitism from his party. And here we have now a situation where it's clearly creeping back in a number of forms. So he's in a really difficult situation. And what's interesting now is that where this evolves internally within the Labour Party, I'm not too interested in the Labour Party, to be honest with you. I'm a Conservative and a very proud Conservative. But where this evolves for him and his party will be a real test. And I think also indicative of perhaps of those forces that do lie within and around the Labour Party.
Thank you so much for joining us, James Sunderland. Your text...